Dr. Elena Vasquez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stared at the massive black temple rising from the red sand of Kepler 442b. The structure looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surface so smooth and dark that it seemed to absorb light itself. Strange symbols covered every inch of the walls, glowing faintly with an inner blue light that made her equipment readings go wild. "This is incredible," Elena whispered into her comm device. "The dating scans are showing this structure is at least 12 million years old. That's older than any known civilization in the galaxy." Captain Marcus Chen stood nearby, his hand resting on his weapon as he watched the perimeter. His soldiers spread out in a protective circle around the archaeological team. Marcus did not like this place. Something about it made his skin crawl, like being watched by invisible eyes. "Doc, are you sure this is safe? My men are picking up some strange energy readings. The whole area feels wrong." Elena barely heard him. She was too busy running her scanner over the symbols covering the temple door. Her translator was working overtime, identifying languages she had never seen before. Ancient Zephyrian, Old Crystalline, Proto-Vegan, and dozens more, all saying the same thing in different ways. "Do not wake the sleepers," Elena read aloud. "Let the ancient ones rest. Disturb not those who shaped the stars." She looked up at Marcus with bright eyes. "This is it, Marcus. This is the find of the century, maybe of all time." Ambassador Zalon floated closer to them, his ethereal form shimmering in the alien sunlight. The tall, graceful being moved without touching the ground, his long robes flowing like water around his thin frame. His people, the Etherians, were among the oldest members of the Galactic Consortium. They remembered stories that other species had forgotten. "Dr. Vasquez," Zalon said, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Perhaps we should heed these warnings. There are old stories among my people, stories of beings who came before, beings who built worlds and moved stars. They sleep now, and it may be wise to let them continue sleeping." Elena waved a hand dismissively. "Ambassador, with all due respect, every ancient civilization has stories about gods and monsters. These are just warnings meant to keep primitive people away from important sites. Look at these symbols. They're not random. They're a puzzle. Someone wanted future civilizations to be able to read them." She pointed to a section of the door where the symbols formed a clear pattern. "See how they repeat in mathematical sequences? And here, the linguistic roots progress from simple to complex. This isn't meant to keep people away forever. It's meant to keep them away until they're smart enough to understand what they're dealing with." Zalon's expression grew troubled, though his alien features made emotions hard to read. "Humans," he said softly, "always so curious, always so sure that knowledge is good and secrets are meant to be discovered." "That's what makes us good at this job," Elena replied with a grin. For the next 3 hours, Elena and her team worked to decode the symbols. They tried everything: sonic keys, electromagnetic pulses, even basic radio frequencies. The door remained sealed, showing no sign of movement. The symbols continued to glow, but nothing they did seemed to have any effect. Marcus watched his soldiers grow more nervous as the day wore on. Corporal Jake Morrison kept checking his weapon and looking around like he expected something to jump out at them. Private Lisa Wong had moved closer to the others, no longer maintaining her position on the perimeter. Even his most experienced sergeant seemed on edge. "Maybe we should call this in," Marcus suggested. "Get the consortium's best xenoarchaeologists out here. This seems too important for just one team." "No," Elena said quickly. "If we call in the consortium, this site will be tied up in bureaucracy for years. Do you know how many committees and subcommittees they'll form? How many species will want to claim ownership? This discovery will be buried in paperwork." She turned back to the door, running her hands along the smooth surface. "There has to be a way. The symbols are here for a reason. They want to be read." Corporal Morrison had been getting more frustrated as the day went on. He was a good soldier, but patience was not his strong point. Watching the science team wave their instruments at a door for hours was driving him crazy. He had kicked down dozens of doors in his military career. Doors were meant to be opened, not stared at. "Doc," Morrison called out, "have you tried just asking it to open?" Elena looked at him with amusement. "Corporal, this is a 12-million-year-old alien artifact. I don't think it responds to voice commands." "What about knocking?" Morrison asked, only half joking. "Morrison," Marcus warned, "stay back from the door." But Morrison was already walking forward, his frustration boiling over. He had been standing around all day watching smart people wave fancy gadgets at a simple door. Sometimes, in his experience, the direct approach worked best. "Corporal, stand down," Marcus ordered. Morrison stopped in front of the massive door. It was at least 20 feet tall and completely smooth, except for the glowing symbols. He raised his hand to knock, then thought better of it. Instead, he took a step back and delivered a solid kick to the base of the door with his heavy boot. The effect was immediate and shocking. The door swung open with a sound like thunder rolling across the sky. The symbols flared brighter, then dimmed to a steady glow. A wave of energy pulsed out from the temple, washing over the team and making their equipment screech with feedback. Deep inside the temple, lights began to flicker on, revealing corridors that stretched into darkness. Everyone stood frozen for a moment, staring at the open doorway. "Well," Morrison said, looking slightly embarrassed, "would you look at that?" Elena was the first to move. She stepped toward the entrance, her scanner in her hands, readings jumping wildly across the display. "The energy output just increased by 3,000%, she reported. "Something's waking up in there." Marcus grabbed her arm. "Elena, no. We need to report this first." But it was too late. Deep underground, in chambers that had been dark for millions of years, ancient systems were coming online. Across the galaxy, on dozens of worlds, similar temples were beginning to respond to a signal that had been dormant for eons. The sleepers were starting to wake up, and they were not going to be happy about being disturbed. The first sign that something was very wrong came from the vegan home system, 3 days after Corporal Morrison's kick heard around the galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chen sat in the command center of Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station, watching reports flood in from across known space. Her brother Marcus had sent an emergency transmission from Kepler 442b, but before she could organize a proper response, the situation had exploded beyond anything anyone could have imagined. "Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Park called from his station, "we're getting another report. The Zephyrians are reporting that their ancient shrine on Zephyr Prime just opened. Same energy signature as the human discovery." Sarah rubbed her temples. "How many is that now?" 47 confirmed activations across 31 systems, Park replied. "The pattern is spreading. Every site that shows these same symbols is coming online." On the main screen, a communication came in from the Etherian diplomatic ship near the Vega system. Ambassador Xylon's people had always been calm and measured, but the figure on the screen looked genuinely frightened. "Admiral Chen," the Etherian ambassador said, his voice shaking like leaves in a storm. "You must understand what your species has done. The old stories speak of the architects, the ones who came before. They shaped the early galaxy, built worlds, moved stars like children playing with toys. They went to sleep because they grew tired of ruling over lesser beings." Sarah leaned forward. "Ambassador, are you saying these architects are real?" "More real than anything else in the galaxy," the ambassador replied. "And they are waking up." The transmission cut out as the space around the Etherian ship suddenly filled with impossible light. When it cleared, a structure the size of a small moon hung in space where nothing had been moments before. It was made of the same black material as the temples, but it pulsed with internal energy that made nearby stars look dim. Reports continued to pour in from across the galaxy. Ancient sites were not just opening, they were transforming. On crystalline homeworld, the mountain-sized temple had unfolded like a flower, revealing chambers filled with technology that hurt to look at directly. The Ursine Confederation reported that their sacred cave system had become a gateway that led to somewhere else. But the worst news came from the Outer Rim territories. "Admiral," another officer called out, "we're getting reports from the Kepler system. Something big just appeared near the fourth planet." The main screen switched to a deep space telescope feed. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Where Kepler-4 had been orbiting peacefully for billions of years, there was now a different planet. Not destroyed or moved, replaced. The new world was perfectly spherical, covered in geometric patterns that could be seen from space. "The Ursine mining colony that was on Kepler-4?" Sarah asked quietly. "No response to hails," the communications officer reported. "But we're detecting life signs. Somehow, they're still alive down there." As they watched, more changes began happening across the galaxy. The consortium's emergency networks lit up with panicked reports. Entire solar systems were being rearranged. Planets moved to different orbits. Asteroids formed into perfect geometric shapes. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as ancient technologies came online. Then, without warning, a voice spoke from every communication device in the galaxy simultaneously. The voice was like the sound of cosmic wind, like the echo of dying stars. It spoke in a language that every species somehow understood, bypassing their ears and speaking directly to their minds. "Children," the voice said, "you have awakened us from our rest. How disappointing. We left clear instructions to leave the temples alone, yet here you are, playing with toys you do not understand." Sarah stood up, looking around the command center. Her officers were pale, some shaking. This was beyond anything they had trained for. "I am the prime constructor," the voice continued, "first among the architects. We shaped this galaxy when your species were still dreaming of one day crawling from whatever mud spawned you. We built the laws that govern space and time here. We created the very concepts of physics that your simple minds use to understand reality." The main screen suddenly showed a being of pure energy hovering in the void near what used to be Kepler-4. It was beautiful and terrifying, like looking at a star that had learned to think. Around it, space itself seemed more organized, more perfect than it should be. "We grew tired of ruling over primitive children," Prime Constructor said. "So we went to sleep, leaving warnings for you to respect our rest. But children will be children. You could not resist poking at what you did not understand." Across the galaxy, consortium species were responding in the only way they knew how, with fear and submission. The Zephyrians immediately broadcast a formal surrender, offering to evacuate any system the architects wanted. The Crystalline Union began preparing tribute ships loaded with their most precious gems. Even the proud Ursine Confederation sent messages begging for forgiveness and promising to worship the returned gods. But on Earth and her colonies, the response was different. Sarah Chen looked at her senior staff. These were humans who had fought through the resource wars, who had built the first FTL drives through pure stubbornness, who had talked their way into the Galactic Consortium despite being the newest and most chaotic species anyone had ever seen. "Options?" Sarah asked simply. "The Consortium Council is calling for a complete evacuation of all systems with ancient sites," Intelligence Chief Martinez reported. "They want to give the architects whatever they ask for." "What do we know about these architects?" Sarah asked. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Earth's chief xenobiologist, pulled up what little data they had. Based on the energy signatures and what we're seeing, they're beings of almost pure energy. They can manipulate matter at the subatomic level. They rebuilt an entire planet in minutes. Honestly, Admiral, if they want us gone, we can't stop them. Sarah nodded slowly. And what do we know about human nature? Then, Lieutenant Commander Park spoke up. We don't run, ma'am. We don't bow to anyone. And we definitely don't abandon our colonies because some ancient alien tells us to. Even if that ancient alien can rebuild planets? Dr. Walsh asked. Especially then, Sarah replied. Martinez, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we're not evacuating anything until we know what these architects actually want. Park, get me a direct line to the consortium leadership. Walsh, start analyzing everything we can about these energy beings. I want to know how they work. Admiral, Dr. Walsh said carefully, these beings shaped the galaxy. They're essentially gods. What could we possibly do against them? Sarah looked at the screen, showing the prime constructor floating in space, like a miniature star. We do what humans always do, Doctor. We learn, we adapt, and we find a way. These architects might have shaped the galaxy, but they've never dealt with humans before. As if hearing her words across space, the prime constructor's attention suddenly focused on Earth's broadcasts. For the first time since Awakening, something had surprised it. While every other species in the galaxy was fleeing or surrendering, one small group of recently evolved primitives was refusing to be impressed. The ancient being found this interesting. The meeting was held in what used to be the Kepler system. Prime Constructor had remade it entirely, turning the space between planets into a vast chamber with walls of crystallized starlight and a floor made of compressed matter. Representatives from 47 species sat in chairs that had been grown from the vacuum itself, each one perfectly suited to their biology. Elena Vasquez felt completely out of place. She was still wearing her field clothes from the archaeological dig, her boots covered in red dust from Kepler 442b. Around her sat the most important beings in the galaxy, the Consortium High Council, supreme military commanders, and species leaders who commanded the loyalty of trillions. She was there because her team had started this mess. The others were there because they ruled civilizations. Elena just wanted to dig up old things and figure out how they worked. Prime Constructor floated at the center of the chamber, a being of living energy that hurt to look at directly. Around it, smaller architects had taken positions like points of light in the darkness. Their very presence made reality seem more solid, more real, as if existence itself was more organized when they were awake. Children, Prime Constructor spoke, its voice filling their minds without words. We have gathered to discuss the new arrangement. You have awakened us from our rest. Now we must decide what to do with you. High Chancellor Vexstar of the Zephyrian Republic stood first. His feathers were arranged in the formal pattern of submission, and his voice trembled as he spoke. Great architects, Vexstar began, we humble ourselves before your infinite wisdom. Our species offers complete surrender. We will evacuate any worlds you desire, and serve in whatever capacity you see fit. We ask only for mercy for our ignorance. Prime Constructor regarded the Chancellor with what might have been boredom. Surrender accepted. You may continue existing. Other leaders rose to offer similar terms. The Crystalline Union pledged their entire mineral wealth. The Ursine Confederation offered their military might in service to the architects. The Etherians promised to sing songs of worship for the rest of time. Each offer was accepted with the same disinterested acknowledgement. Ambassador Zaylon spoke for the consortium as a whole. Mighty architects, we recognize that this galaxy is yours by right of creation. We ask permission to continue existing in whatever small corner you see fit to grant us. We will follow any law you establish and worship you as the gods you clearly are. Prime Constructor's attention turned toward the human delegation. Admiral Sarah Chen sat straight in her chair, neither cowering nor prostrating herself. Beside her, Elena fidgeted with her scanner, still trying to get readings on beings made of living energy. And what do the humans offer? Prime Constructor asked. Admiral Chen stood slowly. Nothing. The chamber fell silent. Even the other architects seemed to focus their attention on this small group of recently evolved mammals. Nothing? Prime Constructor's voice carried a note of surprise. That's right, Sarah replied calmly. We don't surrender, we don't offer tribute, and we definitely don't worship anyone. Elena looked up from her scanner. Actually, we do have some questions. Sarah winced. Elena was brilliant, but she had no sense of diplomacy. This was not the time for questions. But Elena was already standing up, her scanner still beeping as it tried to analyze the impossible beings around them. You say you shaped this galaxy, Elena said, addressing Prime Constructor directly. But why did you go to sleep? I mean, if you're so powerful that you can rebuild planets in minutes, what possible problem could you have had that required taking a million-year nap? The other species representatives looked horrified. You did not question gods. You certainly did not suggest that gods had problems they could not solve. But Prime Constructor found itself actually considering the question. When was the last time someone had asked why it did something rather than begging for mercy? We grew weary, Prime Constructor admitted. The responsibility of maintaining order, of solving every crisis, of being the answer to every problem. It became tiresome. So you left, Elena nodded. But you also left warnings telling people not to wake you up. Warnings that were basically puzzles designed to be solved by any civilization smart enough to read them. That's not really a stay away sign. That's more like a knock first sign. Sarah grabbed Elena's arm, trying to pull her back down into her seat. But Elena was on a roll now, her scientific curiosity overriding any sense of self-preservation. And another thing, Elena continued, shaking off Sarah's grip. If you're so tired of solving problems, why are you immediately jumping back into ruling the galaxy? You just said you were weary of being in charge of everything, so why not let us handle our own problems? Prime Constructor was quiet for a long moment. Around the chamber, species representatives held their breath, waiting for the humans to be vaporized for their insolence. Instead, Prime Constructor began to laugh. It was a sound like solar wind, like the echo of supernovas, like the music of cosmic background radiation. It filled the chamber with something that had not been heard in millions of years. Genuine amusement. Fascinating, Prime Constructor said. Every other species offers submission, worship, tribute. You offer nothing and then criticize our life choices. Well, Elena said, a bit defensively, you did ask what we were offering. Indeed we did. Prime Constructor's attention focused on Elena with an intensity that made her scanner explode into sparks. Tell us, small arguing creature, what would you do if you had our power? Elena thought for a moment. Probably take a vacation. Maybe find a nice quiet planet somewhere and study the local geology. Power seems like a lot of work. And if problems arose that required intervention, I'd probably try to teach other people how to solve them. That way, next time, I wouldn't have to wake up. Prime Constructor was silent again, but this time it felt different. The other architects were communicating among themselves in ways that made the air itself vibrate with meaning. Finally, Prime Constructor spoke again. The arguing creature makes valid points, it announced. We did indeed grow weary of solving all problems for all species. Yet here we are, immediately resuming that role simply because we have the power to do so. Chancellor Vextar looked confused. Great architect, surely that is the natural order. The powerful rule, the weak serve. Is it? Prime Constructor asked. Or is it simply the pattern we have always followed? Elena's broken scanner was smoking, but she was grinning now. You know what I think? I think you're bored. You've been asleep for millions of years. You wake up to find the galaxy full of new civilizations doing interesting things, and your first instinct is to put everything back the way it was. That's not divine wisdom. That's the cosmic equivalent of an old person complaining that everything was better in their day. This time, several of the other species representatives fainted. But Prime Constructor was definitely amused now. Continue, small creature. Your argument intrigues us. Look around, Elena gestured at the gathered representatives. Every species here has developed differently. The Zephyrians mastered crystal technology. The Ursines built incredible mechanical engineering. The Etherians figured out energy manipulation. Each species found their own solutions to the problems you used to solve for them. She pointed her smoking scanner at Prime Constructor. You're not gods. You're just very old and very powerful. And being old and powerful doesn't automatically make you right about everything. Prime Constructor considered this. And what would you propose, Elena Vasquez of Earth? Elena blinked. She had not expected to be asked for solutions. A test, she said finally. You say you're tired of solving problems. We say we can solve our own problems. So give us some problems to solve. If we fail, you can go back to running everything. If we succeed, you can go back to your nap. Prime Constructor's form brightened with something that might have been excitement. A test. Yes, that has possibilities. The other species representatives looked terrified. The humans had just challenged gods to a contest. But for the first time since Awakening, Prime Constructor felt something other than boredom. These small, argumentative creatures might actually be entertaining. Prime Constructor's test was simple in concept, but terrifying in scope. 3 problems that had once required the architect's direct intervention would be presented to the mortal species. If they could solve all 3, the architects would return to their slumber and leave the galaxy in mortal hands. If they failed, the architects would resume their role as galactic rulers. Elena found herself appointed as Earth's primary representative, much to her dismay. She was an archaeologist, not a problem solver for cosmic crises. But as Admiral Chen pointed out, she was the one who had started this mess, and the one who had convinced a godlike being to give them a chance. The first problem appeared without warning in the rival system. The entropy engine, as Prime Constructor called it, was a stellar phenomenon that defied physics as anyone understood them. A region of space roughly the size of Earth's solar system, where the laws of thermodynamics had somehow reversed. Instead of energy dispersing, it was concentrating. Instead of matter breaking down, it was building up in impossible ways. But the effect was spreading, and if it continued, it would eventually unravel the fabric of space-time itself. When this phenomenon first appeared, Prime Constructor explained to the assembled team of scientists, we solved it by moving everything in a 50 light-year radius to safe distance and sealing the area with barriers that required constant maintenance. Elena stood on the observation deck of the research ship, watching instruments go crazy as they tried to measure the impossible. Dr. James Park, Earth's best theoretical physicist, stood beside her with an expression of complete bewilderment. This shouldn't exist, Park muttered. It's like someone took entropy and turned it inside out. Energy is flowing backwards through time. Matter is spontaneously organizing into more complex forms. It's the opposite of everything we know about how the universe works. Maybe that's the point, Elena said. She was thinking like an archaeologist, looking for patterns and purposes. What if this isn't a natural phenomenon? What if it's a machine? Park looked at her like she had grown a second head. A machine that breaks physics? A machine that uses different physics, Elena corrected. Look at the pattern of the effect. It's not random. It's growing in a spiral, and the center point is perfectly stable. That's not how natural phenomena behave. Over the next week, Elena's theory proved correct. Deep scans revealed a structure at the center of the phenomenon. An ancient device, left behind by a civilization even older than the architects. It was designed to create a region where entropy ran backwards, possibly as an experiment or maybe as a desperate attempt to prevent their star system from dying. The solution, when it came, was pure human thinking. Instead of fighting the phenomenon or trying to contain it, Dr. Park figured out how to control it. By building a network of quantum resonators around the effect, they could direct where the backwards entropy went. Instead of spreading randomly and breaking reality, it could be focused and used as a power source. "You turned our ancient problem into a solution," Prime Constructor observed with what might have been approval. "The entropy engine now provides energy for 12 star systems. Elegant." The second problem was more complex. A war that had been raging for 3,000 years. The Moth Collective and the Flame Empire had been fighting so long that neither side remembered what started the conflict. They communicated through different senses. The Moths through electromagnetic patterns that the Flames could not perceive, while the Flames used thermal communication that the Moths interpreted as attacks. Every attempt at diplomacy failed, because neither side could understand how the other thought. "We solved this by separating them, by 7,000 light-years," Prime Constructor explained. Distance prevented further conflict, but also prevented any possibility of resolution. Elena's team included Dr. Sarah Kim, a specialist in xenopsychology, and Commander Martinez, who had experience in conflict resolution. They spent days studying both species, trying to understand how such fundamentally different minds could ever communicate. The breakthrough came when Elena noticed something in the archaeological records. Both species had evolved on planets orbiting binary stars, but with different dominant stars. The Moths had evolved around a cooler, more stable star, and thought in patterns of slow, careful analysis. The Flames had evolved around a hot, variable star, and thought in quick, passionate bursts. They're not enemies, Elena realized. They're complementary. The Moths are good at long-term planning and detailed analysis. The Flames are good at quick decisions and creative solutions. They've been trying to make each other think the same way instead of working together. Dr. Kim developed a translation matrix that did not just convert language, but converted thinking patterns. Moths learned to present their careful analysis in the quick, passionate style the Flames understood. Flames learned to break down their creative bursts into the detailed patterns the Moths preferred. Within a month, the two species had not only stopped fighting, but had begun the largest joint engineering project in galactic history. A ring of artificial worlds around their shared border where both species could live and work together. "Remarkable," Prime Constructor said. "You did not just stop the war, you turned enemies into partners." The third problem appeared to be the simplest, but proved the most difficult. The Silent Worlds were a cluster of 12 planets where all biological activity had simply stopped. Not died, not been destroyed, just paused. Plants hung motionless in the wind. Animals stood like statues. Even bacteria had ceased all movement. The planets were alive, but completely still, as if someone had pressed a cosmic pause button. "These worlds have been silent for 2 million years, Prime Constructor explained. "We quarantined them to prevent the effect from spreading, but we never determined the cause." Elena's team spent weeks on the first silent world, studying the perfectly preserved ecosystem. Everything was alive, but completely inactive. Plants still photosynthesized, but so slowly that it was barely measurable. Animals still breathed, but took one breath every few hours. It was like life in extreme slow motion. The answer came from Elena's background in archaeology. She noticed that the pattern of stillness was not random. It radiated out from specific points on each planet, like ripples in a pond. Following the pattern led to ruins of ancient cities, all built in the same style as the temples they had found earlier. But these were not ordinary ruins. Elena's scans showed that the cities themselves were alive, in a way. They were conscious, aware, thinking entities made of stone and metal and crystallized energy. They were the planets themselves, given consciousness by their long-dead inhabitants. They're lonely, Elena realized, as she stood in the central chamber of the largest city. They're sentient planets, and when their creators died, they were left completely alone. The stillness is not a disease or an attack, it's depression. They put everything to sleep because being conscious and alone was too painful. The solution was both simple and profound. Elena's team built a communication network that allowed the planets to speak to each other. For the first time in 2 million years, the silent worlds were no longer alone. Within days, life began moving again. Plants swayed in the wind, animals resumed their normal activities, and the planet minds began sharing their thoughts and experiences with each other across space. "You gave them friendship," Prime Constructor observed. "We saw a problem to be contained. You saw minds to be healed." As Elena stood in the chamber where this had all begun, surrounded by the successful solutions to 3 impossible problems, she realized that Prime Constructor was looking at her with something like respect. "Your species does not solve problems the way we do," the ancient being said. "We used power. You use connection. We imposed solutions. You found partnerships. We saw obstacles to be overcome. You saw opportunities to be created." Elena nodded. "That's kind of what humans do. We don't like leaving problems unsolved or people unhelped. Even if those people happen to be sentient planets or ancient energy beings who think they're gods." Prime Constructor's form brightened with what was definitely amusement. "Yes, we are beginning to understand that." The final meeting was held in the same impossible space where it had all begun. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The representatives of 47 species no longer sat in fear. The architects no longer radiated divine authority. Instead, there was something that had not existed between gods and mortals for millions of years: mutual respect. Prime Constructor floated at the center of the assembly, but its form seemed somehow less overwhelming than before. Around it, the other architects had taken positions that suggested consultation rather than commanding. "The test is complete," Prime Constructor announced. "The mortal species have proven something we had not considered possible. They have not simply solved the problems we presented, they have solved them better than we did." Elena sat in her chair, still wearing her archaeological field gear, though it had been cleaned and patched since their adventures began. She had never expected to become the unofficial ambassador between humanity and cosmic gods, but here she was. "When we solved these problems originally," Prime Constructor continued, "we used our power to force solutions. We moved objects that were in the way. We separated fighting species by vast distances. We contained threats that we could not understand. These were the solutions of beings who saw themselves as separate from and superior to the problems they faced." The other species representatives listened with growing amazement as Prime Constructor continued. "But you approached each problem differently. You did not force solutions. You created partnerships. You did not contain threats. You turned them into resources. You did not separate enemies. You helped them become allies. You did not impose order. You grew understanding." Ambassador Zalon, who had spent the previous weeks in a state of shock at humanity's approach to cosmic problems, finally spoke up. "Great Architect, are you saying that our solutions were superior to those of beings who shaped the galaxy itself?" "That is precisely what we are saying," Prime Constructor replied. "And it has taught us something important about the nature of power and wisdom." Elena found herself standing up again, despite Admiral Chen's attempts to keep her diplomatically quiet. "What did you learn?" Prime Constructor's attention focused on her with the intensity of a star, but this time it felt warm rather than overwhelming. "We learned that there is a difference between having the power to solve problems and having the wisdom to solve them well. For eons we believed that greater power automatically meant greater wisdom. We were wrong. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. You see, Prime Constructor continued, when you have unlimited power, every problem looks like something to be overwhelmed with force. When you can reshape reality with a thought, you stop looking for subtle solutions. You become lazy in your thinking because you do not have to think carefully. Elena nodded, like using a sledgehammer when you need a scalpel. Precisely. Prime Constructor's form brightened with amusement. But when you have limited power, you must be creative. You must understand problems deeply. You must find ways to work with reality instead of simply imposing your will upon it. One of the smaller architects spoke for the first time, its voice like the sound of distant music. The mortals succeeded because they approached each problem as equals, working with other equals. They did not try to dominate their challenges. They tried to understand them. Prime Constructor gestured toward the assembled representatives. This is why we have decided to return to our slumber, not because we are weary of ruling, but because we understand now that ruling is not the solution to the galaxy's needs. Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrians looked confused. But great architects, without your guidance, how will we handle future crises? How will we maintain order? The same way you handled the problems we just gave you, Prime Constructor replied. By working together, by being creative, by refusing to accept that any problem is truly impossible. Elena stepped forward. But you're not just going to abandon us, are you? I mean, there might be problems that really do need cosmic-level intervention. Prime Constructor's form shifted into what might have been a smile. We are not abandoning you, Elena Vasquez of Earth. We are giving you the tools to handle such problems yourselves. The space around them suddenly filled with light, as the architects began transferring knowledge directly into the minds of the assembled representatives. Not domination or control, but genuine gifts of understanding. Principles of cosmic engineering, methods for communicating across impossible differences, techniques for solving problems that spanned multiple star systems. But more than technology, they shared perspective. The understanding that problems were not obstacles to be crushed, but puzzles to be solved creatively. That apparent enemies might be potential partners. That limitations often led to better solutions than unlimited power. However, Prime Constructor added, we do have one condition. Admiral Chen straightened in her chair. What condition? The humans must teach the other species to be more like themselves. The non-human representatives looked alarmed at this prospect. Elena could understand why. Humans were not exactly known for their calm, diplomatic approach to problems. Not to be chaotic, Prime Constructor clarified, apparently reading their thoughts, but to be curious, to ask questions instead of accepting answers, to argue when something does not make sense, to try the direct approach when subtle methods fail. Elena grinned. You want us to teach everyone else to kick down doors? Metaphorically speaking, yes. Every species here has developed efficient, orderly approaches to problems. This is valuable, but it can also lead to stagnation. You will teach them that sometimes the best solution is the one nobody else has tried because it seems too simple or too bold. Over the following months, the transformation of galactic civilization was remarkable. Elena found herself appointed as the first director of Impossible Problems, a new institution that specialized in challenges that traditional approaches could not solve. Her first staff included representatives from every major species, all learning to combine their methodical expertise with human-style creative chaos. Captain Marcus Chen, meanwhile, had been given perhaps the strangest military assignment in galactic history. He commanded the Temple Kickers, an exploration force specifically tasked with investigating sites marked with Do Not Disturb warnings. Their mission was to determine whether such warnings represented genuine dangers or simply untested opportunities. The Galactic Consortium reformed itself as the Galactic Cooperative, with decision-making shared among all member species, but with humans taking the lead on problems that required unconventional solutions. The Zephyrians learned to question their own traditions. The Crystalline Union started experimenting with flexible approaches to engineering. Even the dignified Etherians began occasionally arguing with each other about the best ways to solve problems. But perhaps the most significant change was in how species approached the unknown. Instead of fear and careful avoidance, the galaxy developed a new attitude: curiosity and cautious investigation. 6 months after the architects returned to their slumber, Corporal Jake Morrison stood in the ceremony hall of the new Galactic Military Academy. He wore a dress uniform that he still was not comfortable with, and held a medal he had never expected to receive. The ceremony was being broadcast across the galaxy as he was awarded the Order of Applied Audacity for demonstrating that sometimes the most sophisticated problems require the simplest solutions. His first class of cadets from 17 different species sat in the audience, all eager to learn his first lesson in applied audacity. Sometimes the best way to solve a cosmic mystery is good boots and poor impulse control. As Elena watched the ceremony from her office in the Department of Impossible Problems, she reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy was louder now, more argumentative, more willing to take risks. Ancient temples were being opened regularly, leading to discoveries that advanced science and culture in ways no one had imagined. Problems that had seemed impossible for centuries were being solved by teams that combined methodical analysis with human-style stubborn creativity. Her desk was covered with reports of new discoveries, new partnerships, and new solutions to old problems. In the corner, her repaired scanner beeped quietly as it analyzed a fragment of architect technology that the ancient beings had left behind as a parting gift. But the best part, Elena thought as she watched Corporal Morrison try to explain quantum mechanics to a class of confused cadets, was that the galaxy was no longer waiting for gods to solve its problems. It was solving them itself, one kicked door at a time. In the depths of space, in chambers that had been dark for eons, the architects rested peacefully. For the first time in millions of years, they slept not from exhaustion, but from satisfaction. The galaxy was in good hands. Curious, stubborn, occasionally reckless hands, but good ones nonetheless. And if those hands sometimes kicked down doors that were meant to stay closed, well, that was exactly what the galaxy needed.